Hello and welcome to Pockenrop. In today's video I am taking a look at my top 15 disappointments. These are albums that I was hotly anticipating listening to for the first time and failed to meet my expectations for a variety of reasons. This does not mean that the album is necessarily bad or poor. It's more the fact that my expectations weren't met. So it's a very personal thing. As ever, I've used PubMeeple to do my rankings list. There will be a link in the description below so you can do your own rankings of stuff, and I do recommend it. It's a great resource. So let's dive in at number 15, and it's 1993's Very by the Pet Shop Boys. I own a copy of the Greatest Hits double CD, Pop Art, and it is superlative. It's an absolutely brilliant compilation. It has 5 tracks from Very that were released as singles, which includes Go West, and I wouldn't normally do this kind of thing, and Can You Forgive Her? So I was really anticipating listening to Very based on the strength of those really good singles. And what I got, I found largely unlistenable. The worst culprit being, I wouldn't normally do this kind of thing, which is an absolutely brilliant single. But when you hear it on the album, I couldn't abide it. It taught me that a good remix can turn a good song into a great song. As a result, it really failed to meet my expectations. And they were quite high because the album that came directly before it, Behaviour, is my favourite Pet Shop Boys album by some distance. But Very just failed to hit the mark, and I really dislike it. My number 15 was Very. And number 14 is an album that I have heard people wax lyrical about. It appeared in top 100 lists and often cited as the best album by a hugely prolific artist, which is Frank Zappa. And the album was We're Only In It For The Money. When I finally heard this, I hated it. Yet that track, Who Needs the Peace Corps, really did get under my skin and actually isn't at all bad. But the rest of the album I found unlistable pap. I don't think, on the strength of that, I would ever choose to listen to anything else by Frank Zappa again. My number 14, We're Only In It For The Money by Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention. And number 13 is the follow-up to, again, another one of my favourite albums. It's by Pink Floyd, and it's The Final Cut. So this was the final Pink Floyd album by Roger Waters, and in almost every respect, it is a Roger Waters solo album. It's the follow-up to The Wall, which is an incredible listening experience, but The Final Cut, this reached number 1 in the UK, which is unlike several other Pink Floyd greats like Dark Side of the Moon and The Wall, and it doesn't deserve it. It's turgid in a way that Pink Floyd albums usually weren't. I mean, yes, they're proggy, but they were never turgid. And I was so looking forward to hearing The Final Cut, despite people telling me that it was a bad album, but they were right. And as a result, it hits my number 13 biggest disappointment, The Final Cut by Pink Floyd. At number 12 is an album that I heard people say was their favourite album of all time, and so I really wanted to like it, and it just fell seriously flat. It's In the Aeroplane Over the Sea by Neutral Milk Hotel. So having bigged this up in my mind based on what I'd heard on radio and lots of other people saying what a great, fantastic album it was, I was seriously underwhelmed. Apologies if this is your favourite album, but for me it did absolutely nothing. My number 12, In the Aeroplane Over the Sea. At number 11, I will need to take you back to about 1988-89. I became a Beatles fan in 86 and a McCartney fan in 1987, but I was also interested in their solo careers. I heard Imagine by John Lennon, and I thought, what an amazing album. And then I heard my number 12 entry on this list, and that was John Lennon and the Plastic Ono Band. Now, I might get some comeback for this, because this is often cited as one of the greatest albums of all time and frequently cited as the best solo Beatle album by many. And now I appreciate the Plastic Ono Band in a way that I didn't when I first heard it. Now, perhaps it was the terrible sound quality that apparently was on the original album from 1971 and has been massively cleaned up in future remixes, and indeed this year's half-speed mastered version of the Plastic Ono Band that has the 50th anniversary. But I think there was also a rawness in the track God, where he says, "I don't believe in Beatles," that as a fresh Beatle fan just felt like a punch in the gut. Now, as I say, now I can appreciate the Plastic Ono Band. I don't think I had the emotional maturity back in 1988, 89 to like it. It's coloured my opinion of the album ever since. Like I say, I can appreciate the Plastic Ono Band and perhaps even enjoy it now. But that disappointment never leaves you. Number 11, John Lennon and the Plastic Ono Band. Into my top 10. And at number 10, I've got an album by a band that I, again, got into in the late 80s. Everyone says this is their worst album. I don't agree. If you watch my ranking for this band, you will see that I play something ever so slightly lower. But it is my greatest disappointment, and it is Hot Space by Queen. Now, I already knew at the time when I was getting into Queen that Hot Space was widely viewed as being their weakest record at that time. And it was true. It is. But I loved Under Pressure. When I then listened to the album, side 1 is hot garbage. Side 2 contains a few positive things like Las Palabras de Amor or Put Out the Fire. But, it was a huge disappointment. And I've struggled to listen to it ever since. My number 10, Hot Space by Queen. And number 9 is another album that followed on from one of my all-time favourites. That album being Imperial Bedroom by Elvis Costello and the Attractions, which is absolutely brilliant. The follow-up, though, hotly anticipated. It was NME's Album of the Year of 1983, Punch the Clock. Now, you may have heard me say on a previous video that I had the joy of discovering Elvis Costello in album order. And this was in the mid-90s. So I got Imperial Bedroom, I fell in love with it, and then I got Punch the Clock. And Punch to the Gut is a better description for it. It's got good songs. Don't get me wrong, there are great songs on there. There's Every Day I Write the Book, which I already knew and already liked. Let Them All Talk, which is fun fluff. And Shipbuilding, which is heavy. And there's other decent stuff on there like Invisible Man and Charm School. But the whole experience was such a come down after the triumph, the masterpiece that was Imperial Bedroom, that it couldn't help but be a massive disappointment to me. And therefore, my number 9. At number 8 is another follow-up to a classic. This time it's Elton John. And if you are interested in what I think of Elton John's Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, you can go and watch my reimagined video. But the follow-up to it is Caribou. It contained Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me, which is an absolutely wonderful song, but casts a huge shadow over the whole album. And the material on there is, in my view, just nowhere near up to scratch and what in terms of Elton John had been doing up to that point. Solar Prestige Gammon, Grimsby, Pinky, and I can't even tell you what any of those sound like, because having listened to the album, they just never made it back onto my player. Ticking was good, if unsettling, but it's also, I suppose, doesn't help the fact that I never really liked The Bitch Is Back. As a result, Caribou was something of a disappointment. and that's why it found its way into number 8. Now at number 7, I've placed an album from 2020 that I saw as being the best album by so many lists on that year. When I heard it, it was a disappointment, and it is Fetch the Bolt Cutters by Fiona Apple. Now, people had said what a wonderful album this was. It was her masterpiece. It was fantastic. I hated it, truth be told. Huge disappointment when I was going through and listening to things from 2020. Massive disappointment given the hype that all of those lists planking it at number 1 had placed it. Fetch the Bolt Cutters, Fiona Apple, my number 7. At number 6, I have placed an album that was a disappointment for everybody. In 1995, one of the biggest selling albums in the UK was released. Full of anthems, full of amazing songs. And it is, of course, What's the Story, Morning Glory. In 1997 came the album that effectively is viewed as having killed Britpop. It's Be Here Now. Q gave it a 5-star review, and that's sometimes thought because they actually gave What's the Story 2 stars and got that big time wrong, that they overcompensated. Everyone was saying what an amazing album, and within 6 months everyone was actually saying, gosh, this is an overblown mess. And that's what it is. However, I wasn't taken in with that. I bought it. I was bought with the hype. I listened to it and I went, what's the fuss? What is the fuss with this album? Is this really 5-star ratings across the board? No, it's a clag fest. My number 6, Be Here Now by Oasis. Into my top 5, and these are artists that I love. So this is going to be very personal examples. In some cases, it might be their worst album that I'm referring to. But remember, this is biggest disappointment, which doesn't mean the worst album necessarily. But in the case of number 5, it is. And in my view, that is Blue is the Colour by The Beautiful South. This was trailed by Rotterdam and Don't Marry Her, which are both brilliant and great fun. But they do not represent this album at all. This album is a depressing downer of a listen throughout, with the exception of those 2 songs. My advice to anybody who wants those 2 songs is buy a greatest hits. Do not buy Blue is the Colour. Such a disappointment when I heard it. Stuff like The Sound of North America. There was a lack of life in there, despite the fact that those 2 singles returned them to the top 10. And it's actually The Beautiful South's best-selling original album. Blue is the Colour. Massive disappointment for me. At number 4 is another band that I love, Deacon Blue, and it's Whatever You Say, Say Nothing. So I became a Deacon Blue fan in 1989. I bought all their albums when they come out. Even now, I buy them when they first released. And so I bought Whatever You Say, Say Nothing. Your Town had already been released as a single and is an amazing song. But the spirit of Your Town is not carried on through the album. And even the reissue version from 2012, Ricky Ross kind of admits that the band were starting to plod. Whatever You Say, Say Nothing. The writing was on the wall for Deacon Blue at this point, and they didn't survive it, if we're honest. And they split up. And Whatever You Say, Say Nothing is the predominant reason for that. My biggest disappointment from that band. So at number 3, also from 1993, is Off the Ground by Paul McCartney. Now, Paul McCartney has had some pretty awful albums in his career, but this was my first disappointment as a Paul McCartney fan of a new release. I loved Flowers in the Dirt. I still love Flowers in the Dirt. This was the follow-up, and boy, did it fail to meet my expectations. Whilst there was a great lead-off single in Hope of Deliverance, top 20, yes. There were great songs in there, things like Mistress and Maid, The Lovers That Never Were, and I absolutely love Get Out of My Way. But it was such a come down that I think it really affected me in terms of excitement levels for albums when they were released throughout the 90s. If you've seen my 1990s albums video, you'll see that I stated that this was a difficult decade for me. And I attribute that to the level of disappointment that my favourite artist gave me in 1993. It affected me deeply. 1993, Off the Ground. At number 2, Paul McCartney is involved in this one as well. And it is the Beatles Anthology, Volume 1. Now, Beatle fan, and I was so looking forward to this anthology series. Now, Anthology 2 and 3 are far better, but Anthology 1, all of these, you were going to get to hear the recordings that predated their fame. And there was a new Beatle track in Free as a Bird, and it all kind of came together with a big flat pancake. But what a mess Anthology 1 was, to the point where all of those linking bits of narration that they had on it, they didn't bother with for Anthologies 2 and 3. They got those right. But Anthology 1, I probably listened to it no more than 3 times in my life. And that's a reflection of just what a disappointment that album is. So what did I place at number 1? So my number 1 from the 2000s is Keane's Hopes and Fears. The follow-up is Under the Iron Sea. And maybe I built up my expectation levels thanks to Hopes and Fears so high that it was never going to meet it. But to this day, I dislike the album Under the Iron Sea. I don't own it. And I love Keane. I really, really like Keane. I did a great Generation Mix podcast with my son about Keane, and we really, really enjoyed listening to the tracks that I picked, including the ones from Under the Iron Sea. But the album itself, again, it was another blow in my excitement levels during that decade. What a disappointment for me. Under the Iron Sea by Keane, my number 1 disappointment. So, this list has been a bit of a downer, hasn't it? But I know I'm not alone in listening to things by artists that I love or have been really looking forward to that don't hit the mark for you. Let me know in the comments below what you would consider amongst your biggest disappointments. So remember to like. Apparently that means that it comes up in other people's searches on YouTube. So please do like the videos. Subscribe. That's great. We've gone up to 16. Let's get higher. Let's double that by, I don't know, end of August. That'd be fab. I do intend putting stuff out roughly once a week. And remember to hit the bell to get notifications. But until next time, thanks very much for watching.